Okay, everyone. I have been nominated to introduce the panel, which I'm lucky and happy to do. So I'll just ask the panel to come up as they're introduced. We will start with Neil Fearnot. Dr. Neil Fearnot is the founding president of Med Institute, full-service medical device development company, and has served in leadership roles at Cook Biotech and Cook Advanced Technologies. He holds a PhD in electrical and biomedical engineering. Do we give that degree? We did. Okay. From Purdue University, and has authored over 150 scientific publications and holds 75 patents. With more than 40 years in medical device research and regulatory affairs, Dr. Fearnot has significantly influenced global regulatory policy and innovation. He was honored with AAMI's Lofman Great Batch Prize for his contributions to medical instrumentation and patient care. And I'll add a slight abbreviated thing there that became the Lofman Great Batch. Fearnot Prize in our department, which we're continually grateful for every year. So, thank you. Okay. Professor Sherry Harbin is a professor of biomedical engineering and basic medical sciences at Purdue University and the founder and chief science officer of Genephis. She's a pioneering researcher in collagen-based biomaterials with over 25 years of experience in tissue engineering and regenerative medicine. Her lab's discoveries led to the development of Collamer, a self-assembling collagen technology now being commercialized for wound care and surgical reconstruction. Dr. Harbin's a fellow of the National Academy of Inventors and NAMBI, and has received multiple awards for innovation and commercialization. Brooke Beyer. Dr. Brooke Beyer is Senior Vice President of Purdue Innovates at the Purdue Research Foundation, where she leads efforts to commercialize university innovations and support Purdue-connected startups. A triple Purdue alumna with a PhD, MS, and BS in biomedical engineering, she has held multiple leadership roles since joining the foundation in 2013. Under her guidance, Purdue Innovates has executed over 1,500 licenses, secured more than 1,700 US patents, and generated over $230 million in licensing income. Her work has earned her recognition, including the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership Foundation Faculty Commercialization Award. That must be a big award. That's a lot of words. I am not going to go through all of Christine's titles again so that we can get to the panel, but you all know fellow of everything. Up there, I only see one person that has 2 academies. So of all of those academy members, you have 3 with the Academy of Inventors. Yeah, well, please, come on up. And our moderator today is Professor Tammy Kinzer-Ursum, the Marta Gross full professor of biomedical engineering when we get her. But a lot of times she sits up here on the 3rd floor as the senior associate dean, Professor Barr routinely explains to me that Senior Associate Dean is also abbreviated as SAD. So Tammy is not SAD yet. She's Associate Dean of Graduate Professional Programs for the College of Engineering. So I think you have...
Great, so I thought I'd... Okay, there it's on. All right, so I thought I'd start off standing, and we can sit as I can sit as the conversation goes on. But first I want to thank our very, very distinguished set of panelists. It's really an honor to be up here with you today. So what I'm going to do is I have a few questions prepared, but I'd also like to leave some time at the end for questions from the audience. So I'm just going to kind of look at the time, keep an eye on that, and we'll see how many of these questions we go through, and hopefully that'll spark some questions from the audience here in a minute. So kind of the first question is, and this can be to each of you, you can decide whatever order you want to answer, but what are the key factors that determine whether a basic science discovery is truly translatable into the clinic or commercial applications versus not translatable, not applicable? Christine, you want to start? And then, based on your experience, what makes a good science discovery translatable into the clinic?
That's a good question. So, I'd say, well, first of all, I think is it possible that it can address a real need? I mean, I think that's always the key thing. Is there a need out there? And, understanding that need beforehand is better if you can do that, but sometimes you don't know the need until you sort of discover something. So our lab in general tends to be translatable. So we try to, when it's something that we develop, we try to protect the IP as much as possible. So in case it goes in a direction that we can, and wait as long as possible before you protect it. But then you have to be careful not to disclose it and give presentations on it. So yeah, I mean that's a good question. Sometimes you don't know, I guess, so sometimes you just need to be sort of more. We always try to protect as we go along, file our disclosures with our commercialization office just in case. And then some things don't go any further and then they don't convert to a full patent and then do. So, yeah.
So keeping your eye on the ball with the need and continuing to design to the need, and then protecting the IP, having a good relationship.
Yes.
With the OT
Yes.
Office of
Definitely.
Commercialization, yeah. So those are the two things. Keeping your eye. So Brooke, from your perspective.
Yeah, I feel like she was giving my talk for the tech transfer office plug, so thank you for that. But definitely the clinical need, like you mentioned, I think that's a key theme we see in our office when there's a real clinical need that our inventors are after. That's great, but one of the roadblocks that a lot of times they hit is maybe not always understanding the customer at the end and who's making those decisions and understanding the regulatory and reimbursement to get through those. So I think the science and the technology and understand the clinical need is great, but then being able to partner with regulatory reimbursement kind of strategy to help get through those and understand, as well as IP attorneys. So like you mentioned, a lot of times if you can protect the foundational technology, that's great, but continuing to file on those as you shift and move and having broad patent protection is really key there, as well as figuring out who your strategics could be at the end of the road and having those relationships early, and so you can bring them along your journey as well.
Thank you. Sherry, you're living this right now with your recent 501(k) certification, so let's hear from you.
Yeah, so product market fit, as Brooke mentioned, and customer need are very key, important aspects, but other aspects are understanding your technology mechanistically, and this helps from the standpoint of getting it through the regulatory process. Also, what's really important, and Christine touched on this, is understanding the scalability of your technology, right, in terms of manufacturing and whatnot. And one thing that, as I reflect on translational research, that I can say to the audience here, because we're the College of Engineering, is that it's really making sure that you can get it through that engineering design process, right? Design inputs, design outputs, and then that verification and validation process. That is translational research.
And Dr. Fearnot, I'd like to hear your wide-ranging experiences over the last 40 years, bringing multiple technologies to market.
I had the pleasure of seeing a lot of technologies go to the market, and a lot of the keys have been mentioned. Really understanding the technology, getting a good enough understanding from an engineering standpoint that you can actually write the patent that's going to stick. And it's not the patent of what you're thinking about today, but it's visualizing what you might be coming up in the future and getting that in the patent, so that as the technology evolves, your language is broad enough to pick that up. We also, obviously, funding, graduate student effort, all these things are really important to get a product there. What I generally look at, though, in addition to see if a product product idea has potential, is to look at workflow. And the workflow starts with the patient going to a doctor's office or hospital or whatever they connect with the healthcare, and what's that person that's interacting with that patient going to do for the patient, and how does that translate into a clinic workflow or hospital workflow? Because we've come up with great technologies that meet the potential unmet need, but they don't fit in the workflow. And one of the things Christine had in one of her examples was talking to that surgeon, and the surgeon saying, well, I don't know what you're doing with this technology, but here's what it would do for me in my workflow with the patient while I'm doing the surgery. And that's really precious. And so seeing the technology in the mind of the person that's going to take care of the patient, and how that workflow, how the patient comes in, how the technology gets used, is really important to deciding whether a technology would make a good product or not. Because if it's manufacturable, the economics are right, and the workflow's right, it's almost a guarantee.
You had mentioned funding, and that kind of leads into my next question, which is, as part of entrepreneurship, we hear a lot about this, the valley of death, where you have a technology developed, you've identified the need, and now you're moving into research and development. So my question is, how do you navigate that valley of death where it's beyond basic funding, but before you can raise a lot of capital investment, before you're able to really kind of get the money to be able to do that manufacturing piece? So maybe talk a little bit about your experiences navigating that valley of death between the bench research and bedside implementation.
I'm happy to take this one because
All right, please go ahead. Sherry's in it right now, so she's going to be the first to answer.
Yeah, so if you think about all of the aspects that go into translating a technology, you have the technical aspects, you have the regulatory, manufacturing, quality, you have the business aspects in terms of, okay, how we're going to get this to market. That is a big dollar sign, tens of millions of dollars. And so as you're navigating from bench to bedside, you have to think about what are the opportunities in terms of funding sources. And here's where, if you're doing this from an academic standpoint and you don't have the luxury of somebody coming in and saying, hey, we would like to immediately license this from you, now you're stuck piecing together the different funding aspects. And that can start with, your federal funding sources, but then again, those are limited in terms of what the metrics are and what you're supposed to produce. And then you might move on into SBIR and STTR applications that are designed to support translation, but they still don't have enough dollars. And so then you start to talk about individual investors and VCs and then partnering with industry. And there's where things get a little precarious, right? Because there, the way that you attract those folks and attract that funding is very different, and the metrics in terms of your performance is very different than what you saw with NIH grants and other things. So funding is a key piece, and all I'll end with is, in terms of navigating that funding aspect, having the technical vision and the business strategy melded and married is so, so important. If there is a divergent vantage point there, it's very tough to navigate that valley.
Yeah, I can comment just from themes that I've seen. So at Purdue Innovates, one of our jobs is to try to help, right, our Purdue connected startups obtain funding, whether that's from VCs or we invest in pre-seed ourselves. We have different R&D grants that we give the professors' labs as they're trying to get through the initial proof of concept in order to prove out the technology so that it could be licensed. But some of the key kind of themes is absolutely going for the government grants, and sometimes we call it the puddle of peril instead of the valley of death, depending on the mood we're in of the given day. But thinking creatively about other means that you can tap into. We just launched something at Purdue Innovates for those students out there, and I know Tammy and I were just talking about it, but a commercialization fellowship. So someone that is recently graduating or doing a postdoc and they want to stay around and work on the technology and maybe a startup after they graduate from Purdue. And sometimes that can lead into a startup and kind of first dollars in to help support that startup. But ultimately, funding it's always a tough thing. At Purdue Innovates, we do have our investor network as well. And so I'd say try to find like-minded individuals or Purdue alumni or groups that you can go to that you can trust and build out that investor network to practice that pitch, friends of friends. And really, it's who you know, and just keep hanging in there. And I know, right, Sherry has experienced it and is doing a great job of navigating that. And we're trying our best to support these startups. But it is a grind. And a lot of the examples of success that have come out of Purdue BME, it's taken a few years, right? I can think of Sonar Med with George Wadika and the pediatric example there, where that was almost a 30-year journey. I think he tells the story there. And there were many times where I think that company, almost didn't make it, and now they're acquired by Medtronic, and they're used in at least 5, I think, neonatal ICU units across the country, and probably many more. So I think it's just perseverance and find ways that you can tap into a network.
I'll just plug a few things since there's students in the audience. Things that my students have used to take our technology and move it into a company. The NSF I-Corps program was fantastic, really focusing on customer discovery and customer need. As a lab, we've gotten money from the Trask Foundation or Trask Fund, which is out of Purdue Innovates to move that technology into a more kind of commercializable state. And then I'll plug the commercialization fellowship where the college is also putting in money. The college, the department, and the PI kind of co-fund, and then Purdue Innovates is giving money to really move those technologies forward. So just a little plug for some of the things that we have here at Purdue. So, any other thoughts on Puddle of Peril, was it?
I think the one thing I would like to reiterate that's been said here already is perseverance. I was told that any project worth pursuing will have at least one, if not 2 or 3, valleys of death, or puddles of peril, as you say. And so knowing that up front might help. And, having started several companies, I can tell you that every one of them has had a dark moment. Either a group of the key people in the company decide to quit, somebody sues the company for millions of dollars, the government agency comes in and shuts it down for some reason, or competitors decide to steal the technology. There's no limit to the causes for that, but I can tell you for each of the companies I've started, there's been a moment where you're just looking in the mirror wondering, what was I thinking? And perseverance is the only solution to that. It's tough. It's not for the weak of heart or whatever. And right, Sherry?
Absolutely. And when you have inspirational people that have shown that this is possible, it makes it all the more worth persevering through and working through. So, absolutely.
The other point that was really critical is the Purdue family is honestly amazing, and it is unique. It is very unique. I travel around the world, been to Asia 150 times, Europe probably, I don't know, several hundred times. And it's unique. The level of support you can get as a student, as a graduate student, as a alum at Purdue is very unique, at least in biomedical engineering. So use it. Use it or lose it, they say.
That's what they say.
Yeah.
Right. Christine, would you like to add anything before we shift
Sure,
topics?
sure. No, these are all great comments, but I would say that, yeah, finding money wherever you can get it is important. So in Texas, with our startup Alafair, we were able to find money through Brackenridge Hospital, which gave sort of small grants to their physicians, and so we were able to do that. Texas had a Texas Emerging Fund, so you could apply for that. We also applied for an SBIR, Phase 1, Phase 2. From the National Institutes of Health, so that was really important. So wherever we could get money, especially if you can get non-dilutive money as much as possible. So what we're doing at Florida, we're tapping the our UF commercialization funds. They have funds for pilot studies and so forth, and that's important to do. And then we're also reaching out to foundations that specifically fund spinal cord injury work. But I would say as much as you can do in the university space before taking it to a company is important. So we do as much as we can there because you have access to all these amazing facilities. And sometimes once you become a company, there's a lot of rules that come in place. It makes it a little trickier to access certain facilities, and there's just a lot more red tape. So as much as you can do in the university setting to test it before making it into a company, I would say is really important to do. So, and just as a researcher, another practice that we do in case your work may end up being commercializable is we always blind our studies. So blind your studies if you can. It's something small that you can do now. Just work with teammates to blind them, and then they unblind them at the end so that you don't have bias. So you can code everything, and that's always been helpful too. So
I want to take the next question in a different direction, and that's kind of talking about collaborative spaces. So what role do you think that cross-sector partnerships between academia, industry, government play a role in accelerating the translation of research, and what makes those collaborations successful? And so I think each of you, have experience in this, and this is something also that I would, highlight the Purdue environment where we do have a lot of industry interactions and collaborations. But what makes those types of collaborations important and successful?
Well, I'll just kick it off with the word consortium, because I feel like we have a lot of those at Purdue where we have government funding coming in, you've got industry, and you've got the Purdue researchers and team working on things together. And so for BME specifically, right, having a consortium where you have the med device company, you've got the clinicians, and you've got the engineers all working together on a, one effort. Magical things can happen, and when you have government and industry funding supporting those researchers as well, it really leads to real-world applications and impact. So I'll kick it off there, but we like to see those collaborations happening.
So yes, collaborations are critical. So getting clinical input as early as possible for something that's clinical. I mean, I think we're talking mostly that. And so absolutely critical. So when we had, a neurosurgeon come in and work side by side with our students, that was absolutely, that way we could, really gear it for the customer. So getting to know what that need is, what the usage will be is going to come through collaboration. So, and I just also wanted to mention, somebody had mentioned, you did mention the NSFI Core program? That's a great way to learn about your customer segment. So I did there's regional versions, there's national, which is a lot of work, and they're coming out with abridged versions. And I incorporate a smaller version in actually a course that I teach. But getting to know who the end user is and those. And that's basically collaboration, is reaching out and knowing who those end users are going to be, and the entire, getting to know the opinions and the feedback from people all across the care team is important, because you'll learn different things from different people, and so I consider that part of the collaborative team to develop your end product. So.
In terms of cross-sector collaborations, those are very, very important. Industry perspective brings in, again, and reminds young students as they're training into this vision, right, about the manufacturing aspects, about all of the quality control that needs to go in that process, but also about market constraints. And it really focuses in on kind of those real-world impact and applications from that standpoint. Again, where I got my start was from the Hillenbrand Biomedical Engineering Center. That's really where biomedical engineering got started. And it was the group of physicians, scientists, and engineers working alongside industry partners, right? And it's really that sort of culture and vision that we've tried to move forward. So it's really impacted me as I've grown here at Purdue. And also we're looking to, put students in those sorts of traineeship opportunities so that they can garner those perspectives as well.
So I think one important lesson that I've learned, we learn lessons from mistakes, so just keep that in mind. But there's a language that people speak in industry. There's a language that people speak in academic science. And there is a different language that people speak in the government. And in order to get collaborations to work, it's important that we are multilingual. And so that's a plug for having, if you have an opportunity for an internship in an industry, get there, because you're going to learn language that you never recognized existed. Same thing as if you could have some time in a government position. They have internships too. And the only people I know that are successful are the ones who have learned those various languages. We have a collaboration, and one of the professors here, Aaron Lottis, has been involved in that as well, where it's not only U.S. government, industry, and academic centers, but international as well, between the different governments. And like for 15 years, we've chaired the conversation between the FDA and the Japanese regulatory authority. And why would they want to have an industry person moderate their discussion? It's a different world. And so to the degree you can understand those different languages, that provides the basis for the opportunity for collaboration. And we've had a lot of very healthy interactions between governments, industry, and academic. One of the transitions that I had to learn was I learned academic science being on the faculty here at Purdue. But then I didn't realize that regulatory science is not the same science. It's a totally different science. And they think about it totally different than academic science. And what happens when somebody schooled in academic science goes to the agency and starts talking to them about academic science? Well, the regulators look at them and go, okay, you're an academic. You don't get it. You're not speaking my language. And I'm not going to listen to you. That's what happens. And so the opportunity to be in a collaboration and learn all the languages is really fun.
So here's a question more to a point that you brought up, Christine, which is, kind of sidetracks are great, and the way we think about impact in these types of spaces is different than the way we think about traditional academic impacts. So kind of the question is, how should we measure the success of translational research beyond traditional academic metrics like publications or citations? So discussing for academics kind of what that looks like for them and what the goals are is the point of the question. So metrics for success.
So let me see if I understand your question correctly. So could we, so in an academic community, we do have certain metrics. How many publications do you have? Where is it being published? What are the citations on those publications? And sometimes, maybe other things are not valued as much is what you're saying. And how can we bring value to
How do we talk about the value when your impacts aren't in those traditional academic metrics, but like patients, right? Like, over 135,000 patients positively impacted by your work. Maybe that's one metric. Maybe I just answered my own question. But just talking a little bit more about, if you haven't as an academic, haven't quite, gotten that large of a patient impact, but keeping, again, kind of keeping that eye on the ball to having a positive impact and what that looks like beyond traditional academic metrics.
Yeah, no, and I think that's important. I think it's important to communicate that as much as you can. So I think sometimes people tend to just because you don't maybe you don't have the citation metrics or the publication metrics, but talking about the development of some of these activities, that this has a commercial application, this could potentially impact this. I think it's part of it is just you need to communicate it better. And I mean, I do think that it's important for those who are doing the evaluating of whether they're evaluating students or evaluating faculty for like promotion and tenure to value those types of activities. I think that's the more difficult thing, to be honest, because there are so many traditional metrics that we use. And so I think it's just, conversations and, keeping, I don't know how to say it, but communicating that on a regular basis of how important that is. Because there used to be a day and time when you didn't really talk about commercial activity or translational activity, you know, sort of on the side. And then this is all the other stuff that you do and that you have to do. And I mean, to some extent, you can't, you need to have a balanced portfolio. I've always said that. So I've always had other things that have been, more future driven, and then others that maybe have more commercial potential. But I think just communicating, where that impact can be is really important. And I think it's becoming more and more common that it's okay to do translational work in an academic setting, whereas before I think there was some sort of taboo with it. So I think, there's becoming more and more acceptance, which is good, but making sure that you have a good fit too. So like if you're going to be looking for a faculty position in a department for grad students or postdocs that are out there, you'll find a department that values that. You can ask that. So some departments will clearly say, no, that's not something that we're really interested in. It has to be this basic science. And if it doesn't fit with you, then don't go to that program. So finding programs that align, because there are very different programs out there. So, and find one that fits with sort of more your translational goals, and then just communicating the impact that could potentially have, or that is having, and getting the word out there. So, yeah, I think things are shifting, but finding a good fit is really important.
Yeah, I agree with you. Sherry, and then Brooke. So,
And I can echo what Christine said, because I've been here a while, 30 plus years. And so I can tell you that early on, the purpose of doing translational research that I had, right? I had a passion and a purpose that I wanted to do translational research. It wasn't necessarily always falling in line with how academic promotion was evaluated. And so one of the things that I'm really glad to see is the evolution. In our own department, right? We look at the number of patents. We look at that intellectual property. We look at, do you have a startup? How many license relationships do you have? And so looking at all of those translational research metrics are important. Some other ones that I will add are speaking to the partnerships. So, collaborating, doing interinstitutional collaborations where you have clinicians and engineers working together to train that workforce, right, of the next generation of translational researchers. So all of that needs to be factored in, and I think, at least I can say that, in the Weldon School, those are all taken very, very seriously, and back in the day, not so much.
yeah, and I'll just going back to that balanced portfolio, right? We have some researchers here that is their goal and their stated goal, and they communicate that well. And there's other researchers in the department that are more foundational, and then other people in between, and having that healthy mix and the support from the department that supports all of those activities is really important and special to have. So, Brooke?
Yeah, what I was going to say, as someone who has to report out on metrics to many boards and deans and leadership, I think we are very blessed at Purdue, and I think that shift did happen. I can't quite pinpoint, but when I became in kind of the position and office that I'm in, it was the 2012, 2013 time period. And I think at that time we had a president that really leaned into entrepreneurship, commercialization, and wanted to see change happen at Purdue. And so tried a lot of new things, kind of like a startup ourselves. Some things stuck, some things didn't. But at Purdue, I know College of Engineering, the tenure policy, we get asked about, does this person have any issued patents, patent applications, licensed technologies, just like what Sherry was saying. And so I think from impact, Purdue's done a really good job of leaning into that as being a measure. I know that we celebrate being fourth in the country for number of issued U.S. patents coming from a university, and I feel the university and the researchers take pride in that, and they want to continue to stay ahead of Stanford and others. So it's not, it's the California system, MIT, the Texas system, and then Purdue, right? So I think that we're really proud of that, and it just shows to reflect that it's not always just the publications and citations, but what is protectable in that and how we can get those translated to the hands of industry or startups.
Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we not only look at the metrics that are evaluated externally by, let's say, the departments that are promoting academic, but also we ask ourselves, what's our mission in life, right? And I really believe that the impact of Purdue's biomedical engineering, if you take all of the derivative impacts, it's over 100 million patients. The company out in the research park that was started with Purdue Technology, I think they're up to, 8 million patients or something like that now treated. You mentioned a lot of patients as well. And, to me, that's really important because that patient could be me, it could be someone in my family, it could be a friend. And that contribution, is really important to me. I don't know what's important to you in your career or your life, but it's really satisfying to have looked in the eyes of many patients who are so grateful that we did a really good job at engineering and building a product, and they're grateful that their health has been improved by that. So there are the academic metrics, and then there are the whatever the other metrics are that are also important.
Yeah. We have about 10 minutes left in the session. I want to open it up to questions from the audience. We've covered a number of different areas, but very curious, especially students. So I'll go ahead and, do we have? All right, well, you can use my mic. Okay, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I was just wondering, when you were sort of talking about how like every project worth pursuing has at least one valley of death, how do you know if a project isn't worth pursuing, or if you've hit sort of like a dead end where it's not really going to go anywhere and you need to sort of redirect yourself?
That is an amazingly good question. Most of the time it's called a pivot, okay, in the business sense. And so and she actually did a beautiful job at talking about a pivot with the film, right? Okay, we were thinking about doing this, but wait a minute, surprise. And so I think in your heart when the data that's coming into you tells you in your heart that it's not going to fly, quit. It's not worth it. But as long as your heart tells you this could still work, I would keep going, because those valleys are pretty dark. I mean, and it takes a lot of enthusiasm inside you and a lot of fiber to keep going. But I can tell you that it's been hugely worth it to get these products to patients and then look at what it's done in their lives. I mean, it's just so rewarding. And nobody can take that away from you, right? If you've done it.
I'll add that the whole pathway, you break it down into milestones and tasks, right? Just like engineering design. And from that standpoint, you're measuring every step forward, every milestone that you accomplish, right? And that's your signal that you are bringing value, right? And so, looking at, are you achieving those milestones and keeping those milestones real? And the other thing is also communicating with others, right? Clinicians, folks in business. Make sure you're keeping it real and you're vetting constantly. Hey, do you think we're on track? And make sure you're listening to what people are telling you. So, milestones.
I just wanted to add, so yeah, that pivot point, for example, we were trying to scale up our in situ crystallization for nerve, and we tried multiple different things to get it to work. So, we sort of exhausted our, what we could do to make it work for for nerve, and that's when we made the pivot. But at the same time, so we stopped pursuing it for nerve, but we still published it. So keep that in mind. We published it because sometimes negative results are very good for people to know why certain things are not being pursued in that area again. Because otherwise, so don't, you can quit on that, but don't quit with the publication part. So yeah, we exhausted that, pivoted. Also, sometimes it's funding based too. So if you run out of money, you may not be able to continue. But in academic setting, it's still important to publish that work, is what I'm trying to say, because then other people won't go down that same path necessarily, or they may see a different path that you didn't see, and that's fine too. So.
Great. Other question? Yeah. Tammy.
I want to ask one really quick one, partly just so I can say Les Geddes. Les was extremely famous for asking, "Can you pee on it?" Right? That was always his medical device thing was, "Can you pee on it?" So as a type 1 diabetic who wears a continuous glucose monitor and a pump all the time, I just want it to work. So with all of your stuff, what's your favorite engineering? That's just a raw engineering question, right? Like, what is the most likely failure mechanism for an implant or for a device? What's your favorite resiliency thing that you put in there that's going to make sure it works in a very hostile environment like the body, for example?
So you're saying, can I pee on it and then implant it?
That's,
That was what
Les always said that. He didn't ever say that to you?
I
did.
He said it all the time.
I did not ever hear that one.
Oh, I did many times. It goes along with keep it simple, stupid, right? So let me answer your question from experience. The thing that fails in implants most of the time is a connector. Okay? Built a pacemaker. Fortunately, the connector did not fail in that pacemaker, but I had 100,000 other pacemakers where the connector section failed, leaked or whatever. So that's true in electronics systems as well. It's generally the connector. Anyway, that in from an engineering standpoint. I don't know on the biology side if there's an analogy there of what fails in biology.
I was going to say infection, right? So, and if you pee on it, now your urine should be sterile, but anyway, so I would say infection. So many implants, once they're placed in the body, if there is an infection, right, what are the options for that patient? And so minimizing infection is really, really important because you don't want to have to go in and do multiple procedures.
So let's, yeah.
I was just going to say along the line of infection is from the design is taking into account how you're going to sterilize your product ahead of time, because we had some oopses where we didn't think about because you're working in a lab setting, so we just keep it sterile under the hood, but you're not going to do that from a manufacturing standpoint. So considering what sort of sterilization methods you're going to have so that you don't, or you minimize the chance of infection I think is important. Another thing is how surgeons are very creative. They're the cowboys in the world, right? So they'll try anything. So, maybe not realizing that they're going to use your product off label to do all sorts of interesting things that may fail because you didn't test it for that. So that's always interesting too. So.
Yeah, I've been out of the lab many, many years, so I'll, I'll preface it with that. But I think a trend that we see is a lot of sensor following too, is how can you create sensors that can stay in the body for a long period of time and have sensitivity, specificity that you need.
We have one last question.
Hi, thanks for being here. Appreciated. I had a quick question. So obviously FDA approval doesn't automatically mean insurance coverage for patients. And so how do you balance patient accessibility while also, I guess, making profit back or making the money back that you spent to get the product to patients? Like, how do you manage that ratio? How do you, look at patients and go, okay, this isn't going to be covered. How can we approach this? Because there's so many patients that could benefit from these things but can't access the technology.
Yeah, there's a guy by the name of David Cohen, well known in reimbursement, and he has models for how you're going to get reimbursement. And so that's one thing. The sooner you consider reimbursement, the better off you are, right? And sometimes to get reimbursement, you want to jack up the cost of the regulatory approval and make it really, really difficult because your reimbursement is going to be better later. Other times you want to take a real simple pathway through the agency if you get a choice, and that matches with the ability to pay for it better. But the other comment I'll make is there's an agreement between FDA and CMS. So you can ask for a joint meeting of the two and actually ask them to work with each other, which is a little bit tentative, but they technically have an agreement where you can talk with them about FDA approval at the same time you talk to them about reimbursement by CMS. Now, that doesn't cover all the insurance companies, but most of the insurance companies follow CMS anyway. I don't know if that's helpful.
I'll just echo what Neil said. Considering that reimbursement aspect early on as you're thinking about your product market fit, that's just one element of it. And so doing that, it's really important.
So any last thoughts from the panel? And we'll wrap it up here.
I thought the talk today was very inspiring, and I just wanted to say that. I mean,
Agreed.
I think the amount of work you've done is amazing. And I can't wait to, we've treated a number of spinal cord injury patients. There's a desperate need for being able to put nerves back together. And so thanks for the talk.
Yeah.
That was amazing in the work.
Well, thank you. One of the things I didn't mention is that the business model in the spinal cord injury space is a really tough one.
It is.
It's a very tough one. Other companies won't tackle it because there's too few patients it would have to be a prohibitively costly solution. So
I think that's 10,000 approximately a year.
yeah,
US.
it's not a huge number, which is good. So many safety features have been implemented to reduce the number of spinal cord injury patients, but they still exist. So just because there are few numbers doesn't mean they still exist. So that one's a tough business model. So that's why this was saved till the end of my career. So because this is one that I can, maybe I wouldn't say die on, but retire on. I don't know, but you know what I mean. It's something that I can try to fight and see if we can do that, and hopefully it succeeds. But it's going to be a tough business model.
Yeah, it is.
So.
Well, with that, I think we all echo the statement. Christine, thank you so much for coming and sharing your experiences and your research with us. And thank you to all the panelists for sharing your experiences with us today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.